right, here's our last lesson for Mr. Jefferson's administration, events leading into about in lesson 3, some of the things that Mr. Jefferson did that upset the world and upset people in the United States, farmers and industrialists, manufacturers, Federalists, Democratic, Republicans alike. He's gone, and we have a new president, Mr. Madison, and we have a declaration of war by the United States against Britain for the harassment of ships on the high seas, as well as instigating Native Americans against the United States out in the western frontier in the Great Lakes region. And so, what were the outcomes and the effects of this war, politically and culturally? This particular war has a major impact on American identity and American culture, but also causes some political controversy, again, between the regions of the country and our political parties. Mr. Madison's war is what it came to be known as. It wasn't a positive term. We have basically those pushing for war labeled as the war hawks. They tend to be from the west and the south. You might want to add that there off to the side. John C. Calhoun and Henry Clay being a couple of them, and the key leaders there. They're the new young Americans that are the children of the Revolutionary War veterans. Were very unprepared for the war. We have a small military. If you remember, Mr. Madison or Mr. Jefferson shrunk that military down. We don't like standing armies. The states had the number of militia that you see there, but they're poorly trained. The veterans of the Revolution, they're not going to go out and fight another war here. This war is also known as the Second War for Independence. There's opposition to the war hawks, and there are calls for war against Great Britain. The Federalists and those in the region of the Northeast tended to oppose the war, primarily because they tended to have a lot of trade economic connections to Britain. There's a lot of bloodline cultural connections there. If you remember, our Federalists also kind of very much admired the British system of government. Our roots are in that system. But there's a strong economic tie here, and that Embargo Act has created a lot of stress for the Northeast and the Federalists of the Northeast economically, the merchants and the shippers and the traders of the Northeast. And they don't want a war because that's going to shut down the trade with Britain. It's important to know that Britain is our biggest trading partner. Maybe pause that right here and jot that down. It's by far the country that we generate the most trade and economic gain from in terms of foreign trade. The Americans really underestimate Britain and their strength and Native American strength. It's important to know also here, and maybe note off to the side, that Britain, again, is, what we talked about before, is fighting a war against France. So maybe the mindset of Americans is that Britain's going to be spread too thin and we can go ahead and win this war and be more successful with that. But we're really not very prepared. We led an army from Detroit into Canada. A lot of the fighting is going to be along the Canadian border and the Great Lakes. It was blocked by the Indian chief, Shawnee Chief Tecumseh, and his confederacy, and Detroit, which is a trading fort at that time, a small settlement at that point in time, is surrendered to the British and Tecumseh. William Henry Harrison tries to go ahead and invade Canada as well. He's unsuccessful and gets driven back from that. And so the mindset and the Americans and their strategy is to control the lakes and win the battle on the Great Lakes. Then maybe we can have some success on the invasion of Canada. And boy, is there a lot of land to gain up in. With the gain of land, there's a bit of a mindset amongst the warhawks that this growth in land will be more opportunity for American growth and power and economic opportunity. Those western southern farmers are also thinking along the farming line of things, but we'll talk later about how useful that land is up in Canada for farming. Not so much compared to the rest of North America and the South. September 1813, the Americans seized Lake Erie. Admiral Perry of the United States forces defeats the British Navy there. Sends a message to William Henry Harrison: we have met the enemy and are ours. The famous phrase, don't give up the ship, comes out of that battle. October 5th, a significant battle and event. The Battle of Thames River occurs out in Indiana Territory, and Mr. Harrison cuts the British off from their Indian allies, and this is where the great chief Tecumseh is killed. This has a major impact in the war out in the West. It is showing Harrison here killing him, but he is not the killer of Tecumseh, but the great leader is gone, and that hurts the Confederation significantly. The Americans continue to attack into Canada, and they attack what is present-day Toronto. It's called York at the time. They burn the Parliament buildings there. Doesn't cause us to take over the rest of Canada, but some U.S. victories do start occurring by the end of 1813. A lot of it happens on the oceans and on the Great Lakes more than anything else. If we have success militarily, it's on the oceans and the Great Lakes with our frigates, which are actual U.S. Navy military ships. The USS Constitution becomes the famous one out of that. This was a model ship that I had as a kid. It was nicknamed Old Ironsides because it was given a plating of copper around the bottom edge here, so that when enemy ships shot at our ship, the cannonballs would bounce off of it, and it would be just above the waterline or right around the waterline, so that holes would be punctured in and allowing water to come in. Our biggest success, again, like in the Revolutionary War, was with private ships armed by the United States government. Captured a lot of British vessels, very successful there. You can still see the USS Constitution. Today, it's rebuilt version. Most of it is rebuilt. About a very small percentage of it is the actual ship yet. But you can go see that. It's sailed once in a while. If you go ahead and do a little YouTube research, you can go ahead and see that particular ship and tour it. Setbacks for Native Americans are big here with the loss of Tecumseh after the Battle of Thames. Before the Battle of Thames, Tecumseh was talking with the Creeks and other Native Americans down here in Alabama and present-day Georgia to try and join forces there and join the fight. In 1814, there's a major battle in the South. You can see it here on the map in what is present-day Alabama called Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Andrew Jackson, our future president, is significant here, and that basically it involves a slaughtering and killing of men, women, and children. The number you see there of the Creek Nation, and it basically forces the Creek to give up their lands in the South. And so this is a pretty significant battle that's in the South of the United States, out on the frontier. And as all this is going on, as the war is occurring, we have really, actually, ironically and strangely enough, negotiations happening between the United States and the British. But while these negotiations are going on, the British are actually behind the scenes planning an offensive, a great big new attack to win the war, despite the fact that they're supposedly negotiating to end the war. And so with the spring of 1814 happening here, we have Britain putting its full attention to the war, and able to do that because they have defeated Napoleon at this time, so they can send more troops and resources. So they're continuing these negotiations for peace, but yet the attack is going to become more intense. And so with this set of negotiations, there's other things really going on. And we can see who's doing the negotiations there, some familiar names. So there's really 3 invasion forces that are sent simultaneously into North America to try and bring about the end of the war. The first invasion force is focused on the Chesapeake Bay and Virginia area, which is where basically Washington, D.C. is. August 1814, British forces land, and they march to Washington, D.C. From the sea. They overpower the American militia there. They burn the president's mansion, as it was termed at the time, which is today's White House. If you go tour the White House, you can still see the burn marks that have been left on it from the British burning the White House down. Dolly Madison saved a few artifacts, a few paintings, particularly one famous painting of George Washington that was there. And literally, the British were on their heels as they run out of the city and flee the White House. Fortunately, some major rains and thunderstorms put out the fires there. The whole city wasn't burned down. Here's a picture of that portrait that Dolly Madison saved of George Washington. The British don't stay in Washington, D.C. They march north toward Baltimore, another port city, to try and capture it. In Baltimore, this particular cartoon, and in Washington, D.C. in particular, in a suburb of the city, Alexandria, to the south of Washington, D.C., present day, it kind of shows John Bull, which represents the British, and the British here hauling off all kinds of supplies that some people basically cooperated in giving them at that point in time. And so there's a little conflict over that. Some Americans did assist with that at that point in time. And so they march to Baltimore. The British are moving there to take that city. The city is ready. They know about it. It's defended by 13,000 Americans by land. And the city by sea is defended by a fort out in the harbor called Fort McHenry. The British start bombarding it to try and allow a landing force by sea. There is a famous American there. He's a lawyer who was accompanying another American military representative to a meeting with the British officials to try and negotiate a release of prisoners or a prisoner exchange. But as events had it, the British recognized that they knew about the invasion or the attack that was going to happen to the fort and would not let them go back on land. And so they got to watch the bombardment of Fort McHenry, and this big defense of the harbor becomes a success because after an all-night bombardment in the morning, Francis Scott Key and a couple Americans that are there on that British ship wake up in the morning to see the flag still there when they considered that it wasn't going to be there at all. And this is where he writes the famous poem that later becomes the Star-Spangled Banner. The second invasion force is heading towards New Orleans. The goal is to control and capture that city so they can control the Gulf of Mexico and the Mississippi River for British forces and to shut off access to the interior of the country for the United States. But a problem occurs in that the British lost communication with this invasion force, didn't really know where they're at. Coming back to that a little bit later. The third invasion force is coming north from Canada, just like in the Revolutionary War, Battle of Saratoga, Ticonderoga, and such. They were going to chop off the head of the Northeast from the rest of the country. The Northeast, the Federalists kind of supported and didn't really cooperate in this war very much. They didn't serve in the war as much. They actually traded with the British and the Canadians up in New England more than anything else. But their goal was to capture Plattsburgh, New York. And this occurs in September 1814. Invading with 10,000 troops. There's a big battle on the glacial Lake Champlain, and the United States naval forces defeat them there, and the British retreat to Canada. Very significant battle, pushing them back into Canada. The result here with this is that with this battle, Britain decides that if the war is too costly and unnecessary, you might equate this with the last major battle of the Revolutionary War, in which the British basically decided that this was too costly a war and unnecessary. There was little to gain. The public opinion was turning against the war. They'd been at war in Europe for a very long time against Napoleon. It was becoming expensive again. The merchants in Britain wanted to resume trade with the Americans. It was beneficial to both sides. And so this is where Britain decides that maybe we should have an end to the war. And the negotiations turn for the positive. But remember, there's one invasion force that's out there that is kind of lost and doesn't know this. And in the context of all of this, while the war is going on again, the New England region here was not in favor of this war. These merchants and traders and Federalists up here had strong connections with the British in Canada, and through economic trade here with the British in the past, our past history, this war was hurting them economically and hurting that shipping industry. And they actually, again, traded significantly more with the British and the Canadians more than they supported the war in the South. And many refused to fight and sign up for the war. And this resistance and anger about the war was so strong, and they were angry about the Embargo Act, if you remember, that a few of the really radical Federalists got together in Hartford, Connecticut, and formed what was called the Hartford Convention. And they start talking about seceding from the Union or leaving the Union. Most wanted to stay that were there, but there was a few that were talking that we should do this and that we should demand a list of amendments added to the Constitution that would protect their interests, the Federalist interests, and if it's not agreed to, then they would secede from the Union. And so they're talking about something very significant here, and a significant number of the part of the country, Warhawks, people pro-war, aren't going to be happy about. And this cartoon, if you read through it and you pause it and look through what they're saying here, kind of reflects that conflict. We've got Federalists here who are kind of torn over the issue. Some are trying to pull them to the King of England and join up with them and basically secede from the Union and move toward that side. If you look at where New England is, in these New England states, Canada is right there. They could just kind of maybe become part of Canada as well. They're very torn over this. And this is all going on as the negotiations for the end of the war are happening. And the Treaty of Ghent is signed on December 24th, 1814. And this was signed, and news of this comes out after this whole convention information kind of comes out about what the Federalists are proposing and plotting. The Treaty of Ghent doesn't really change much at all. There's no clear winner. Nobody lost anything. No territory changed hands. The borders stayed the same as they were. There was no really mention of the impressment about sailors. You could add here that the forts that the British still had along some of the Great Lakes on American soil finally were vacated, but there's still a problem. The war is over. They've negotiated a treaty, but that last invasion force of the British doesn't know it. and they're heading toward New Orleans. And it results in a battle that didn't have to happen, but it is a battle that very significantly impacts American psychology and us culturally and how we see ourselves. They invade. They finally get to New Orleans, January 1815. Andrew Jackson in the South, and his troops are there waiting. And Jackson saying, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," and prepared for this invasion. Beats the British back and defeats them very soundly, with very, very few Americans killed, obviously, and a significant number of British soldiers and fighters lost. And the Americans are very pumped up, and Andrew Jackson becomes a major hero out of this. And Americans say, "Look what we did. We beat the British. We got a treaty out of it." Most Americans kind of felt that this was part of the treaty and one of the reasons why we won the war, but the war was already done. But it gave us a great deal of satisfaction and a great deal of feelings of superiority and how good we are. And we've won our independence a second time. Again, this is our second war for independence, really. And the British are going to leave us alone and respect us in the future. And now we are a true player in the world, and that's what it really sends the message of. We're a true player in the world, and we have to be respected. But as this news of this great victory comes out, it comes out in the atmosphere of the Federalists saying we need to come up with some more amendments to respect our rights, and if not, we're going to secede. This makes all these positive things, the Battle of New Orleans, the news of peace, makes all of the other Democratic Republican Americans and then pro-war Americans look at the Federalists and say, "How unpatriotic you are! How selfish are you guys? You're just not good, true Americans. You've been resisting the war the whole time, and it's very inappropriate. And because of that, the party loses respect. They are portrayed as the bad individuals, the evil individuals as well, un-American individuals, and that they were assisting the enemy." On the enemy side, really, more than anything else. And because of this, this party is going to die, right? And this party is going to fall away and disappear, and there's really only going to be one party. Again, our national identity is going to go sky high because of this. Our patriotism is going to go sky high because of this. This is going to begin what is known as the era of good feelings, in which everybody was very happy with the war and with themselves and being an American and proud of what they've done. The Federalist Party goes away. The era of good feelings results in just one party now, really, in American politics. One party, and it's going to be a party of the Democratic Republicans, but they're going to be the new Republicans. Make sure you identify them as the new Democratic Republicans. They're the youth of the Democratic Republicans, the children of the Democratic Republicans, the pro-war people who saw an opportunity to take money and territory. They have some Federalist ideas in their mind. They want a strong central government. They want a strong Army and Navy. They want growth and protection of trade. They want westward expansion, more land. We don't get it. We almost won it in a couple of battles there, that whole of Canada. They want the development of a strong nation through a strong economy. And they feel that the government should be allowed to help that happen almost in any way possible. And so they're, at the same time, they want civil liberties as well. They don't want the government stepping on their civil liberties, but economically, protect the nation, defense of the nation, growth of the nation economically. They are in favor of a federal government that is going to help that happen. And that's where we're moving here in the future, in the era of good feelings. The U.S. gains respect from other nations here, especially on the open seas. We don't have this harassment happening anymore, but Native Americans are very much going to suffer. Native Americans who help the British are going to face a significant amount of aggression from the United States after this point in time, especially from Mr. Andrew Jackson, as we'll see, and they're going to get pushed out of their lands even more. So this whole event of the Hartford Connection creates a great deal of division, but yet in the end it brings the country together under one party and one theme. It's the era of good feelings. We're all Democratic Republicans. We are here to stay. We are real. We are good. We are going to be prosperous, and we are going to promote a government that's going to help us become prosperous. So, answer your essential question. Be ready for our next activities you see online assigned for the next class. Have a good day.